If there is one thing us Fire Emblem fans are good at, it's disagreeing with each other. In most franchises, if there was one massive game that was way more successful than any other, has several storylines that are all executed well enough to the extent the game is considered quality, and has more than 100 hours of content, that would probably be universally considered the best game in the franchise. And yet, there is a very significant contingent of the Fire Emblem community that doesn't consider Free Houses to be very good. Hell, how many game series do you know where there is a relatively commonly held opinion that the Japanese exclusive title from nearly 30 years ago is actually the best game? I can name you exactly one, and that is Fire Emblem. And yet, there is one thing we can seemingly all agree on. Fire Emblem Engage's writing is bad. Terrible. God-awful, saw me done. Now, whether that means the game in its entirety is also bad is something we as a community continue to fight on, but at least we all seem to agree Engage's writing isn't. Or is it? Because, yes, I am also a Fire Emblem fan, and therefore I must disagree. To an extent. I think the writing in Fire Emblem Engage is underrated. Still not great, even terrible at certain points, but I do think people are generally too negative about its writing quality. In order to kinda make sense of it all and highlight where I agree with the common sentiment and disagree with it, I've divided the grand topic that is the writing into 4 categories: the plot, the tone, the presentation, and the character writing. In many Engage discussions, I've kinda seen people throw these all on one pile and talk about them like they're all one and the same, which I guess to an extent is fair. After all, they all combine to form the writing we experience. But at the same time, I think there is a wild difference in quality between them in Engage's case, to the point some elements of it get flack that I don't think is entirely deserved. Let's start with something that probably bothered a lot of people, arguably more so due to the outside factors than the intrinsic quality of Engage. The tone. The tone of Fire Emblem Engage is weird. It's definitely different from most Fire Emblem games, and at several points can feel unsure about what it even wants to be. On one hand, you have characters whose designs are very out there, very colorful, vibrant, bright, and far from realistic. Even the characters that are meant to come from the gritty Illusia have design choices that make you do a double take. They're not exactly grounded in reality. Not to mention you have the core element of the emblems, past characters returning, which in and of itself gives Engage a very different tone from the rest of the series, easily making this the least grounded Fire Emblem we have ever seen. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are several moments in-game where Engage appears to treat itself very seriously. The deaths of Lumira, Marnie, Zephyia, and Gris all feel like they expect you to be bawling in front of your Switch, but I can't imagine many people were. And then when it does tackle serious topics, like Vale's split personality, the factual horror Sombron subjected his children to, and Diamant, Alchrist, Ivy, and Hortensia all losing their fathers in pretty brutal ways, the depth feels missing, like the game doesn't want to be a downer or something. You know how Tamara effectively lures bandits into attacking her so she can kill them in retaliation for funsies? That basically describes the tonal problem with Engage to a T. This behavior could totally work in a cartoon-esque environment, where death and defeating bandits isn't treated like it's super serious, even if it is in the real world. But here, whether death matters and war is bad depends entirely on the chapter and the character and the moment. The consistency is all over the place, and that makes Engage a game that is difficult to take super serious, which is definitely an outlying factor when viewed against the rest of the series. However, this is far from the first Fire Emblem game with an inconsistent tone. Fates is notorious for this, arguably even more so than Engage, but plenty of older titles have these moments too, like Awakening, Sacred Stones, and Shadows of Valentia / Gaiden. Definitely not saying this trio has more inconsistency than Engage, absolutely not, but what is a factor that definitely plays a role is that unlike all other Fire Emblem games, I don't think Engage's goal is to be 100% serious. There are moments that try to be and fail, but I don't believe for 1 second this game ever tried to be the serious, deep and mature war tale that say Free Houses aims to be. The Sunday cartoon comparison has been brought up a lot in the 2 years the game has been out, and I think that's a pretty astute comparison to be honest. Now whether that is a tone a Fire Emblem game should be going for is debatable of course, and most of all, I think the timing of Engage coming right after arguably the most well-written or at least lore-heavy Fire Emblem game was unfortunate. Had it come before Free Houses, after Fates basically, I think this tone would have been received way better. Because really, compared to say Fates, which is I would say even more inconsistent, while also taking itself way more seriously, and I would prefer what Engage tries to do personally. Not for every entry, but for the celebration title that Engage was meant to be, I can work with it. But I do admit, the tone IS went for here, it's not one that resonates with a ton of fans. That much was obvious from the moment the game leaked and Alear was dubbed Colgate due to her out there design. Well, you could say that Engage wearing its tone on its sleeve should have caused players to change their expectations accordingly. I don't think that is fair to ask when the series has never been as cartoony or unserious as Engage is. So I guess that, in a way, so far you could say I agree with the popular opinion to a decent extent. However, now is the time where we deviate. The plot, the factual story of the game. I don't think it is as bad as people say it is. It's simple, that's for sure. It is not intricate or mind-blowing or whatever. It's a story like we've seen many times before, with evil dragon dudes, magical MacGuffins we need to collect, a few traders here and there, you know the drill. It touches upon a lot of Fire Emblem tropes, which on one hand makes sense, since this is a celebration title, but it also makes it predictable. Morion had his death written all over him, the same thing with Lumira, Mauvier switching sides was obvious as well, just like Vale's eventual turnaround. Lumira especially felt wasted to me. Had she been around for a couple more chapters to lure us into a false sense of security and get us more familiar with her, her death and later dramatic return could have worked. But right now, it just doesn't. But I do think Engage's plot has its highlights as well. I really like how drastically different the regions in Elyos are, for example. It gives each its own identity in a way we haven't seen much, in the way they're governed, how they treat their citizens, and why they joined the fight against Sombron. I like how the emblems are weaved into the story without becoming overbearing, although I do think this would have been even stronger if Fire Emblem lords in the past would have had more different personalities. I like how you're truly knocked down a peg after Sombron's revival. Rarely has such a mid-story moment ever felt like you have really already lost. And while the ending with Alear becoming an emblem and summoning the help of all other lords definitely has a cheesy tone, I can't help but watch with a smile when I see decades of history lined up like that. But most of all, while again Engage's story is no masterpiece, I also don't think it is significantly worse than a lot of other Fire Emblem stories we've had in the past. The stories of Shadow Dragon, all GBA games, Mystery of the Emblem, Awakening and Fates are more or less the same quality or worse, I would argue. Yet they don't even get remotely the same amount of flack as Engage does. Part of that is nostalgia, I'm sure. Part of that is what we've already discussed, tone. Games like Blazing Blade and Awakening also definitely have their poorly written moments, but their tone is much more serious. And what definitely plays a role as well is my biggest problem with Engage's writing. Presentation. I genuinely believe that a big part of the criticism of Engage's writing is actually the result of a dislike for the way the game is presented rather than how it's actually written. Like, truly, keep the story of Engage intact, but pour it into the mold of a GBA Fire Emblem game and people wouldn't knock on the writing nearly as much. There is a huge difference between seeing a sprite-based Eliwood mourn his father, who you never even really met, and reading how he felt, allowing your brain to fill in the gaps, versus seeing a high-quality cutscene of Alear with his clown hair doing a pinky swear with his mother while she's dying, the camera really trying not to focus on her cleavage or the completely empty room you're standing in, and their voice actor is doing everything they can to sound serious. Oh, and then your Switch starts to dim from the lack of activity just as she's about to die. Good stuff. And for the millionth time, I'm not saying that this scene is wonderfully written or anything. What I'm saying is that it's a 6 out of 10 written scene, brought down to a 2 out of 10 because of the presentation. Hell, you could even argue factual writing, also part of the presentation in a way, brings down the effect of the plot beat that is Lumira dying. This can be seen even better in the scene where Lumira finds evil Alear, which, as a story beat, I find pretty interesting and unique. But it's also the scene with the infamous "I wanna be a good dragon" line, which, yeah, not a good look. I like the idea of Zephyia realizing in her final moments that the family she wanted so desperately she already had with the 4 hounds. I think that's a nicely drafted moment and realization for her, and bittersweet that it comes in her last moments alive. But the scene itself is presented with such over-the-top emotion, and that ridiculous shot of them all standing on a white background, that it loses the punch that I do believe it intrinsically had. In moments like this, it's as if the game is so scared you might not pick up on what it means, that it overloads you with hints about what you're supposed to think and feel, to the point it begins to near on parody. And while I do like some of the ideas Engage put forward, they're not remotely complicated or subtle enough to need this level of help, or any level of help really. And so, I wouldn't describe the writing of Engage's main story as bad, terrible, garbage, you name it. I think it's a fine, decent, acceptable cake, covered in spoiled cherries and delivered to your doorstep at a time where you're expecting a 4-course meal. Disappointment, even frustration at the writing of the game is understandable under those circumstances, but throwing everything under the bus when not everything is equally contributing to the problem is not something I'm a fan of. And don't forget, there is a final fourth category to the writing, one where I honestly disagree with what seems to be the common opinion even more than I do in regards to the main story: the character writing. It sometimes feels to me like Engage's biggest crime in regards to characters is that it isn't Free Houses. Because yeah, I fully agree, the character writing in Free Houses is way better than in Engage. Like, it's not even close. But I'm also of the opinion that the character writing in Free Houses is among the best I've ever seen in a game in general. Like, the fact that Edelgard Discourse still exists today is proof of how well written a character she is, and the other house leaders aren't exactly far beneath her. Free Houses, to me, is genuinely elite in this department, among the best I've ever seen in gaming. Engage not being able to match that quality says nothing about how good it actually is. Once again, the tone of the characters is certainly lighter than the majority of Fire Emblem games, and they are way more out there than what we've seen before, but I don't find them unenjoyable in the slightest. Yanaka is a definite highlight for me. I like the way Diamant and Alchrist contrast, I like Ivy and the uncharacteristic relationship she has with her retainers, who are also great individually by the way, and while there are certainly characters like Chloe, Lapis, Amber, Louis, Marin and Pandreo, who are hard carried by a few of their interests or personality traits, I do find those combinations interesting and intriguing enough to be fun. Don't get me wrong, they don't feel like real people, but I think they're fun and engaging cartoon characters, to bring that comparison back. And I don't know about you, but I prefer that over Brooding Swordsman number 5, and I consider myself the strongest warrior number 7, as we've seen in the series more often. And I once again consider it an upgrade compared to Fates, where the characters are also one-dimensional, but that one dimension isn't all that interesting to begin with. And that's not to say everyone in Engage is a slam dunk. I'm not a fan of Alfred's training-obsessed retainers, and Bunet is a little too weird, for example, but I do think people are too harsh on Engage's character writing for what is more a case of them not vibing with a less serious tone regarding characters, or perhaps overrating how deep older Fire Emblem characters actually are. But I think that really sums up how I look at the discourse around Engage's writing. It appears like a very decent chunk of the complaints are not actually about Engage. They're about it being Free Houses' follow-up and how different the games are. And again, just so you know, if you ask me whether I want Free Houses writing or Engage's next time, I'm fully in camp Free Houses. But for a change of pace, an anniversary title, a game clearly not designed to be Free Houses, I think Engage does a decent job. Not amazing, the writing won't blow you away and the characters won't either, but people are being too harsh on it or too easy on the other games when they say Engage is the Fire Emblem with the definitive worst writing. But hey, that's just my take. How do you feel about the writing in Engage? Especially when you fracture it up in those 4 categories like I've done. Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.